Hello, everyone, and welcome to Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin, and we got our very special guest, Ben Modell, and we'll be discussing his career as a silent film accompanist, as well as his new production of The Bat from 1926. And so, with that, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of talk a little bit about just about you?
Oh, hi. Well, Harrison, first of all, thanks for having me on your podcast. Always glad to connect with more people who may not be aware of what I do or who may have, but just they live in another part of the country, so they don't get to see me perform. My name is Ben Modell. I'm a silent film accompanist, historian, and presenter. I create and perform live musical accompaniments to silent films on piano and on theater organ. I've also written some scores for orchestra for mostly for short films. And I also, for the last 11 years, have run this boutique home video label, Undercrank Productions. And we specialize in bringing quality releases out of the unheralded gems of the silent film era. Films that were very popular, or stars who were very popular and well known in the 1920s, but because their work is not part of the film school canon or whatever you want, or
Right.
hasn't gotten the attention of Turner Classic Movies or Kino Lorber or the Criterion Collection or Flickr Alley, they just fallen through the cracks. So what we're doing is it's not a dig at everybody else. It's that, well, we're going to pick up the slack. And you've
Right.
never heard of Alice Howell? Okay, we'll put out a 2-disc set of her comedy shorts. Or we've released 6 Marion Davies films and many others. We've got, I think, now 33 different discs out on DVD and Blu-ray. Our most recent release I think in the summer, was a film called The Craving, starring and directed by Francis Ford. Not Francis Ford Coppola. There's no relation. It's just that I learned from Kathy Fuller Seeley, whose project this was, that both of them, Francis Ford changed his last name from Feeney to Ford because he was just a big fan of the Ford automobile. And I think that's the same reason why Francis Ford Coppola's middle name is Ford. It has nothing to do with an homage to one or the other. They just
That's
the
funny.
automobiles. But Francis Ford is again somebody who was a very successful, very busy, and popular actor-director, often teamed with a woman named Grace Cunard, who was not only an actor, but a scenario writer. The two of them starred in serials, and nobody knows who these people are, but when you see their films, it is with a lot of the things that we release, you go, oh, I should have heard of this person already. You mean, how come I? So it's that's what I do. And the film, between the film accompaniment work and the home video releases, this is what I do full time. This is my real job.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're living the dream.
I'm living something, but I'm doing. This is. I mean, I shouldn't have a career doing this in 2024. Although it does seem every few years like there are more and more silent film shows happening. There's so much more that's available on home video, and one of the great things I think is that it took a few years where everybody was, streaming is the answer, and
Right.
then every once in a while there would be an article, don't get rid of your Blu-rays, don't get rid of your DVDs, and now it seems like every 2 or 3 months somebody writes that article, and everybody gets it. If you want to see something that was made before the year 1994, you need to have it, and even then there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been licensed, and things
Right.
rotate. So buy stuff on physical media, and so that's what we do. It's all under the umbrella for me of sharing these films with other people, whether I'm programming shows that I play for or going to festivals. For me, it's not so much that I'm a working musician / composer getting to perform, but these are opportunities for me to share films with other people, with audiences.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool, man. And let me bring up some photos here, actually. And
So
so,
that instrument that you're seeing me at there, that is it's a 1928 Moeller theater pipe organ, and that's at the Capitol Theater in Rome, New York.
Oh, wow.
That theater was built in 1928, and that is the instrument that was installed in the theater in 1928. And every year in August, there's something wonderful that happens in that theater called Capitol Fest, and it's a 3 or 4 day classic film convention where every film that's screened is shown in a 1928 movie palace, and all the silent films are accompanied on that instrument. It's myself, Philip Carley, David Peckham, and Avery Tunningsley. And David Peckham is also an organ technician, and every year, for the last 4 or 5 years, he's been working on that instrument. And it just, every year, it sounds more and more like it did in 1928. It's a wonderful instrument, and the theater itself is a real treasure. So, hats off to Art Pierce and everybody at the Capitol Theater in Rome, New York.
Wow. Well, that's really cool. And I got to ask, how does one decide that they want to do this as their full-time job? Doing music for movies that have been gone for almost 100 years in some cases.
Yeah, it was not a deliberate choice, and oddly enough, it was when I made the decision to focus on this. I've been playing for film since I was in college, many years ago, and I was mainly pursuing a career as an independent filmmaker and a comedy writer and performer. I had done some stand-up. I studied improv for a number of years. I was part of a sketch group that lasted for a couple of years. But there was this moment about 23, 25 years ago where I kind of got a little burned out with all of the filmmaking comedy stuff. And I realized that throughout my entire life, anything I'd ever done involving silent film just worked out. And I thought, well, let's go in the direction of the path of least resistance. And it took a while to build it up, but it wasn't a career decision. Like, oh, I think this might be an interesting. It was like, oh, this is the thing I keep getting hired to do,
right?
Without having to bang my head against the wall. And it's something I'm very passionate about. And the more I got into it as a main thing, I realized this is really what my main interest was. Going back to the time I was a little kid, my interest in visual entertainment and physical comedy has always been there, whether it was discovering Charlie Chaplin movies on TV when I was a little kid, or watching a comedian named Soupy Sales, who some of your viewers have no idea who I'm talking about, or discovering the genius of Ernie Kovacs, who was a television comedian in the 1950s and early 60s when I was in high school. Anything to do with physical comedy and visual humor has been something I've been interested in, and anytime I've wanted to pursue something with it, things just open themselves up. And so that was sort of how I gradually made this what I do. And I hope to return to filmmaking now that I've gotten a much deeper understanding about how silent film works. It's not just movies with no sound. And so my goal, as my daughter says, the dream and the goal and the dream is to get back to making films, but making silent films.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And pictured here too, we got your watch party in your podcast.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about comedy and whatnot, that made me think, oh, so that's probably why the silent comedy watch party thing is what you decided to do.
Well, the silent comedy watch party is I launched that the week before the shutdown in March of 2020, when we were all wondering what the hell is going on,
right?
And what's safe. Can I do this? I just gotten back from playing a show in Beatrice, Nebraska, of all places, where some of us were using Purell and some of us were eating out of the same chips bowl, and we didn't know. Yes, I'll shake your hand. No, we didn't know. And then within 48 hours, I watched every gig that I had on the calendar cancel. And I had always had the idea of doing a live streamed silent film show with live accompaniment. but I didn't want to do it because I wanted people to go out to the theater. And I
Right.
felt that
Right.
a live stream would defeat its purpose. Well, there was suddenly nowhere to go for anyone on planet Earth. And I set up my iPhone and some lights and my video projector and a laptop and my YouTube account and clicked go live. And we got such a response, just what I call a pilot. We realized we had to keep going. And it wasn't like, oh, I love these old movies, which my friend Steve Massa and I do. But we were cheering people up for doing, and we got comments on social media and emails. Oh my God, I needed this, and we
Wow.
realized we have to keep going. And the following week, everything was shut down, and so I just figured out how to do this. My wife, now who had never operated a tripod in her life, was now camera one and stage manager. And my friend Steve Massa, film historian and silent comedy expert, I had to figure out how to bring him in remotely. With initially, initially we had him FaceTime on my wife Mana's phone, and we would put it on a little stand in front of the camera, and she would pan down. You look at the first 20 episodes, that's what it is. Okay, and then we would
Wow.
turn Steve around. He would watch, and the film would be projected on the wall here. And then I found this software called Mimo Live, which allows me to play back large video files and do automation and all sorts of stuff with graphics. But the choice there was not, it wasn't really even a choice. It was, we have to do this. We have to do this for people. And every day, not every day, every Sunday at 3 o'clock, we went live and showed 2 or 3 comedy shorts. I accompanied them live on my piano here. Steve would introduce the films. We'd talk back and forth. I put up graphics that we would find online. And it was like a public access TV show, or it felt more like the early days of TV because things would go wrong, things would lock up. A couple times we had a film that we were streaming. We always showed stuff that was in the public domain, but some knucklehead had registered something, and all of a sudden the feed got cut, and I had to resuscitate the stream, come up with another file, download it from a computer down the hallway, have Steve vamp and talk about the comedian, and then we would resume. But
Oh, wow.
we were, and then we were, after about a year and a half to 2 years, as things started to open up, we moved to once every other week and then once a month. And then this past March, our 100th episode was also our 4th anniversary. And I've just gotten so much busier with live in person. It feels weird using the term in person because it's just regular shows now, but there's not much to differentiate between the two. So we were providing laughter to people who there were people who lost loved ones and family pets, and also other had problems with anxiety and depression during the pandemic, and we would hear from people that it cheered them up. And so we built this little movie theater, except that we can't see the audience, and they're all scattered all over the planet. So this will be our 3rd new live stream this year, coming up this coming Sunday. I do shows the last couple of years, and people will come up to me and they do this wave, because we do this at the top of every show. And people I would hear would wave back at their TV sets. And people will see me at a show, and this happened a week or 2 ago in a show I was at Des Moines, Iowa, and I look across the street, I'm walking around pacing, and I see this couple around my age, and they look over at me. All they do is we make eye contact, and they go, and I knew they had been
They've
fans
been
of the show.
watching.
But people will come up to me and say, that's, the silent comedy watch party got me through the pandemic. And so that, as far as a choice, it wasn't even that when we did it.
That's really cool. And I'm looking forward to that one on Sunday. I actually got that reserved, so
Good.
excited for that.
And all the other episodes are archived on YouTube. We've shown over 260 comedy shorts So if anybody wants to go down a huge rabbit hole of slapstick
Yeah.
comedy with spoken introductions and stuff and commentary and stuff like that, check out the Silent Comedy Watch Party on YouTube.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about your podcast then,
Okay.
the Silent Film Music Podcast.
Yeah, well, the podcast started, again, I think around 12 years ago. It's not super regular. I try to do it when I can. I have a great producer and co-host working with me now, a guy named Kerr Lockhart, who keeps us on schedule as long as I have the time. But I do the podcast as a way of teaching people about the craft and the art of film accompaniment. This started out as a blog, and I thought, well, it'll be easier if I just talk, and it's just as hard to do it as a podcast. But one of the things people ask me when I do a Q&A after one of my screenings at a show is somebody will ask occasionally, is there somebody you're mentoring or training? And the answer is, frankly, no. That hasn't come up yet. There are a couple of people who are younger than me who I'm in touch with, and there are some things I'll give them advice on. But between that, and people will ask me, are you going to write a book about accompanying film? And no. But the podcast, I think, is a much easier tool for me to express things without having to turn it into words. And there are, this year, I think, 2 books about film accompaniment coming out. One has already come out, and another's going to come out later on. So the podcast is, I talk about what it's like preparing for a film, what it felt like playing for the film, and then maybe some reflections afterwards. And I also have a few clips from live performances on piano or organ or in different places. So you get to hear some of the places and the instruments that I play on. And that's what the podcast is about.
Well, that's really cool. Well, and I don't know if you've been to Cinecon or not in Los Angeles.
I'm very aware of it. I know
Okay.
I know the folks involved. I've known Stan Tavel for many years. They have a great accompanist already there, and for many years, I was playing at a festival, a silent film festival in northern Norway on Labor Day weekend, and so I could never make it. But I've heard great things about Cinecon, and it's been around for a long time.
Oh, yeah. Well, the reason I bring it up is whenever we watch a silent film and a person's playing on the organ or whatever it is, you can tell it's a lot of work. So I commend you for putting all that effort into it. It's really cool.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. The festivals I play at more often or pretty much every year now, Capital Fest, also the Kansas Silent Film Festival in Topeka, Kansas, and the Turner Classic Movies Film Festival. I've been there almost every year since 2018, and they just announced their theme, so we'll see if they want to bring me back again this year. But not Cinecon, although I've heard great things about it, and they've got great musicians there. But those are the festivals I usually play.
That's really cool. Well, hopefully someday I'll be able to go to Turner Classic and see you playing there. And,
yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on then to the topic of the hour. So the disc here.
Yeah. Yes, the bat. Thanks for asking me to talk about the bat. Yeah.
So what kind of led you to decide this film versus other films other silent films, I should say?
Outside of the overall philosophy where we're looking for things that should be available and were very successful and popular in their day, there's no other real game plan as far as what gets chosen. It's often, I'm always thinking of new projects or looking for things, and every once in a while I'll just encounter a film and think, oh, this should really be available. And that basically the trajectory on this was 2 years ago was in 2022, it was the centennial of Nosferatu. And if you think everyone is showing Nosferatu this year at Halloween, 2 years ago it was everywhere, and I played for it a lot. And there's a monthly silent film series that I play for on Long Island at the Cinema Arts Center, which I also co-program. I've been doing that series since 2006, and I thought, oh, not again with Nosferatu. What else could we show? And this is the weird thing about Halloween and silent film, is that there really aren't, with the exception of Nosferatu, there really aren't a lot of horror films. Hunchback of Notre Dame gets shown, but it's just gothic, and there's a lot of makeup on, that Chaney is wearing. And Phantom of the Opera it's a melodrama, and there's a lot of makeup that Chaney is wearing. There's a couple of scare moments. Jekyll and Hyde, that's another, and Caligari, it's just weird. And then there's Nosferatu. And I love a film called The Cat and the Canary, but it's hard to book it, and it's hard to bring an audience because the title sounds like it's a Tweety Bird cartoon, and it doesn't have a monster in it that so.
That's a Universal one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Cat and the Canary is a Universal. And so I thought, well, what could we show? And I remembered The Bat. And I had played for it many years ago, and remembered, I forget how or why, that UCLA Film and Television Archive had the print. So we booked The Bat for our screening at the Cinema Arts Center in October of 2022. I figured it's got a monster in it called The Bat. The name of the film sounds like it's a horror movie.
Right.
Even if you've never seen it. Oh, The Bat. Well, that sounds like a spooky old movie. And I booked the print. We played it. Our audience really liked it. And I'm watching it. And this is the other thing that happens now. If I'm playing for a film, I'll look at it and think, oh, this would clean up nice. If I could get a scan of the net preservation negative, and we get the funding, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm always looking, oh, this could be a release. And I thought, that's as far as it got. But in letting the folks at the UCLA Film and Television Archive know that the show went great, thanks for loaning us your print, and I just threw it out there and I said, it would be great if this could be released on Blu-ray someday. And that just led to a couple of phone calls or Zooms, and we worked out a co-branding deal between the UCLA Film and Television Archive and Undercrank Productions on the strength of the one that I have had with the Library of Congress since 2014. Is something that Rob Stone helped, who was a film curator at the Library of Congress, helped, and a good friend of mine, helped make this thing happen as a way to get more titles from the archive out. So on the strength of all these other releases I had done with the Library of Congress, we had this now this deal. I did a Kickstarter last year. We went over the funding goal, as my Kickstarters tend to do. Raised enough money to not only fund the project as imagined, but to also add digital restoration, as well as a rare comedy short called A Fraternity Mix-Up, which has one of the weirdest and worst gorilla costumes in all of cinema. It's got glow-in-the-dark eyes, and it's just
Oh,
weird.
wow.
You have to, but this was the thing where the more I researched The Bat, I just couldn't believe that it isn't available, because the connection to Batman alone
Right.
should, whether you subscribe to the theory that Bob Kane came up with it himself or there's him and somebody else, either way, if you watch the film, the links between the Bat and actually the Mark of Zorro, which Bob Kane talks about, if you combine the Bat and the Mark of Zorro, you get Batman. There's a moment in the Bat where everybody's gathered in the living room of this big spooky old house, and there's this big spotlight on the wall with this shadow, with the silhouette of a bat. and it goes
Right.
across. Like, that's the bat signal. Oh my goodness. So that's how they. It was just another one of these things where I thought this should really be available, and let's see what happens. I'll ask and see what happens. And if they had said no, I would have just moved on and probably just tried to continue booking the print. I mean, the other great way to get a film released on home video is to make sure it gets programmed at festivals, and that's not up to the archives. The archives do their darndest. They restore the film, preserve the film, and maybe if there's a new restoration, it'll play a few festivals, then it goes back to the vaults, and they move on to the next project. And
Right.
the next project, this film, I looked it up because the Museum of Modern Art has on their website a searchable database of all their press releases for all their film shows going back to 1935 when they started showing film. And I've been
Oh,
a film
wow.
accompanist at MoMA since right after college, and that I remember that's where I had played for the Bat, and I looked. It was 1995. I thought, how did I remember this film that long? But at the same time, this was it was the photochemical restoration that the UCLA Film and Television Archive had done was done in the early 1990s. It played some festivals, and that's it. Why programmers never revisited it, I do not know. And so my hope is that by getting the film back out there on Blu-ray and theatrically on DCP, this will become part of the rotation
Yeah.
for next year. So that instead of the usual 5 or 6 films, there'll be one more to show. And I think that horror fans and classic film fans and Batman fans will get a kick out of seeing it, especially in the new restoration that we've done working with UCLA.
Well, that's just really, really cool because I watched the movie kind of before we did the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, and what's available is a very low quality, I want to say Laserdisc or VHS print on YouTube.
Yeah, I'll tell you what that is. That in the early or to mid 19, I guess in the early 1990s, when UCLA did their photochemical preservation, because the film had been lost for decades, and a
Hmm.
nitrate print turned up in Boise, Idaho, and
Oh, wow.
thanks to a guy named Frank Thompson, who recommended to the person who turned up the print, get this preserved by UCLA. So that was done, and a few VHS private screeners were made for a few people. Well, it looks like what's on YouTube and elsewhere. It looks like somebody copied a copy of that VHS, and that's what's there. It's the same material, so it's not an official release at all. So that's why when you go all the way back to the preservation negative that the UCLA Film and Television Archive made from the nitrate, and then do a new scan of that, and then stabilize and clean up and grade it properly, you get something that looks like what our Blu-ray does.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. There's a couple scenes in the movie where you could kind of tell like the film was missing, so it was kind of shrinking a bit, and
Yeah,
some of the
we did
sound
the
would drop out too from the
yeah,
music.
yeah. We did the best we could with a guy named Thad Komorowski from Cineast Restorations. Um, did did an amazing job with dealing with some of the warping. There are 2 of the reels had a little bit more nitrate decomposition. That just, unless you get Marty McFly to go back and get a
Right.
print from 1926, if there's no way to bring any of that back. People think that there's amazing software that takes care of decomposition. No, it's just, we did the best that we could, but pretty much you're seeing, the miracle is that it survived in the state that it did at all, and then it
Sure,
just
yeah.
looks. And even if you were to book the 35 millimeter print, it does look quite good, but it's just a little bit cleaner and steadier in our digital version.
Well, I'm really excited for that. And where can people pre-order other than Amazon, but where can they order it?
Yeah, well, like it has on your graphic there, all of our releases are available on any of your favorite retailers like Amazon, Wow HD if you live overseas, Critics' Choice, Deep Discount, Movies Unlimited, et cetera, et cetera. They're they're it's one of the great things. I work with a distributor called Alliance Entertainment. They make sure all of our product is available on all platforms and not just on Amazon, for example. So, and we were releasing just on DVD up till about 3 years ago, and now have moved up to releasing on both Blu-ray or DVD. So yeah, you can get it any place you buy your product, your physical media. I think there may even be some record stores that might carry it. I don't know if Amoeba Records or any place like that has it, but it's easily findable online.
Awesome.
Yeah, and make sure to look for this cover, this amazing cover designed by Marlene Weissman.
Yeah, I really like this cover.
Yeah, she's an amazing graphic designer. She has been working with me on doing graphic design for a silent film series called the Silent Clowns film series that I've been doing for 27 years. And she's done all of the DVD and Blu-ray covers for Undercrank Productions. She is a brilliant artist and collagist and commercial graphic designer. She did a lot of the logos and graphics and fake products for Saturday Night Live in the 1990s.
Oh wow, that's cool.
So she, and Late Night with David Letterman. So among others, but that when I started doing the DVDs back in 2012, I thought I want to make sure this doesn't look self-published, even though it may very well be self-published. And I thought the most important thing was to have proper graphic design, because I feel like that's your first line of defense online.
Definitely.
So make sure to look for this cover so you don't get the version that looks like it was printed through phlegm.
Yeah, but you bring up a good point though, because so many of these movies are in the public domain. It's kind of it's kind of easy to fall into the wrong print, buying the wrong disc. So,
sure,
like you said, look for this one.
Look for the one with the chair on the front. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, lastly, so we'll talk a little bit about the film itself.
Okay.
This being my first time ever seeing it, and I actually really enjoyed it. It was a really good, like, murder mystery, kind of thriller and horror. I like that combination. It was really good.
It's very well directed. Roland West is someone who didn't work for a long time. As you'll see, there's a wonderful video essay about Roland West's life and career, written by Steve Massa, narrated by him, and produced and edited by Crystal Cutty, who's also the co-producer on the overall disc and on most of our productions. He started working after being in the theater as in film in the mid to late teens, and then worked into the early 1930s. And then there was a tragic event that happened that I won't go into here, but it effectively stopped his career. So there's this very short body of work that he has, but he's very talented. His use of camera, choices for lighting and the directing and actors, and the production design by William Cameron Menzies in this film, who I think had come off of doing the production design for Douglas Fairbanks' The Thief of Baghdad, or that came after this. Somebody is yelling at their device right now, which one it is. But all of Roland West's films have a definite maturity of style in terms of the filmmaking, and for something that started out as a stage play, even though there are chunks of it that are almost feel like they're shot like proscenium style.
Definitely, yeah.
It doesn't feel that way. It feels like there's all this vertical space that is part of the frame, and it's not just wasted space. The film is definitely very well made. And it's
Yeah.
what's been very heartening for me is hearing that by telling people, "Hey, watch this movie," and hearing, "Yeah, this was really good."
No, it really was. I think my favorite character is the screaming maiden who keeps doing all
Yeah,
crazy
well,
mishaps.
Louise Fazenda is one of the great character actors of the silent film era, and she worked into the sound era as well. But she started at Keystone like everybody else, and by this point was playing supporting roles in different feature films. And she's yeah, Louise Fazenda is yeah, she's
So
wonderful
funny.
in this film, and the older matron. Uh, um, uh, uh, I think Emily Maddox. She usually plays the mean lady who runs the orphanage, and she usually plays those kind of nasty characters. In this film, she has a little more charm to her, uh, and she's the only person who doesn't seem to be bothered by anything that's going
Right.
on. But yeah, and yeah, it's a great cast.
Yeah. In the chat on the YouTube video I watched, someone compared her to B. Arthur's character in Golden Girls.
Yes, yeah, I could absolutely see that. Um, yeah, she's just very calm and collected, and she has a couple of zingers every once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't think of that, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And on top of that too, I love the bat costume is really, really cool and
Oh my
perfectly
gosh,
freaky too. I loved it.
yeah, there's a couple of moments toward the end where the person playing the bat just comes right up into the camera, and there's this
Yeah.
big gruesome thing with fangs, and like it's yeah, it's scary. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the bat signal. I thought that was a really cool thing. And
Yeah.
there's just so many little things like that, like the grappling hook. It's all like this is definitely
Oh, there's
Batman.
lots of there's lots of little things, and like I said, I don't know if you know the film The Mark of Zorro with Douglas Fairbanks,
I
but
haven't seen it, but I know about it.
okay,
Yeah.
so in The Mark of Zorro, Douglas Fairbanks plays a young man named Don Diego who's wealthy and lives at home with his father, but he's this sort of mealy mouthed milk toast guy, and he's kind of weak, and oh, and the father's like, I wish my son would, and oh, dad. And then at night, he puts on a mask and a cape, and there's this back entrance to his house that opens up out of the ground. Uh, and he goes and he fights crime under the name of Zorro, and nobody figures it out. And he's basically Bruce Wayne until and it was a huge success for him. And one of my I teach a course on silent film at Wesleyan University,
Oh,
and one
that's
of my
cool.
students from this past spring semester told me that there was a series of Batman comics called Batman Year One, I think, and it's kind of the origin story. And there are panels in that are direct lifts from shots in The Mark of Zorro.
Oh wow.
So there's a connection there too. So because we watched The Mark of Zorro in my class, and his eyes kept popping out of his head. Oh my gosh, I know all of these scenes. So yeah, that's when I said if you combine The Mark of Zorro with the Bat, you kind of get some of the basic ideas for Batman.
Definitely. And uh, I also really like the comedy in this movie because I was not expecting it at all. I was just expecting kind of straight horror like Nosferatu, but no,
Yeah.
it had some really funny moments too.
Yeah, and along with Louise Fazenda, there's Eddie Gribbon, who's the goofy detective, and
Yeah.
and it's good. In scoring the film, I was aware of the importance of bringing in some of the comedy relief because, when I was creating the score, which I do while I'm recording in bits and pieces, I realized once everything is set into place and we know who everybody is and all the plot points and machinations are set up, it's about half an hour into the film, and I remember thinking, "Oh, there's another hour to go." And I didn't want to wear out playing, tension and release.
Mhm.
So these little moments with Eddie Griffin and with Luis Fazenda, I appreciated when they came along, and I played them for comedy, so it wasn't just scary music all the way through. But yeah, there's some definitely fun moments throughout the picture.
That's really cool. And
Yeah,
so when you make the score, do you try to base it off the original if it exists, or you just kind of base it kind of like Max Steiner with leitmotifs and that kind of
yeah,
thing?
yeah. And Max Steiner's a great example of that. Yeah, I work that way. For the most part, these films didn't have original scores. They had original compilations. So every
Hmm.
movie theater had a huge library of music, stock music, or library music, we would call it today, that was composed and published for film accompaniment. Because there was so much film being made every and released every week or
Right.
every few days. There's just no way to write that much music. So the scoring happened out in the theaters. And what was called a cue sheet would be sent out, and you could follow it, but you'd have to play every piece that was listed there. But it was really
Right.
meant, well, here, so here's a romantic scene for 2.5 minutes, here's a chase for a minute and a half, and that sort of thing, and you would just sort of mix and match the way you would put together a playlist. So you never heard the same thing in the same theater from one place to the next anyway. So I try to play music that sounds like it's from the era. I'm aware of these mood cues. I worked on a book of them several years ago, and I played through a lot of them, and all of those were composed to sound like classical music. Anyway,
Right.
the difference being that with classical music, the mood keeps changing, but you need a mood to sustain for 2 or 3 minutes with film accompaniment. So they would these composers would create classical music where the mood would sustain for 2 or 3 minutes, and you could cut and paste as needed. So what I do is I try to sound like play music that sounds like it's from the era, having heard a lot of recordings of guys who were accompanists and then continued working into their 90s and into the 2000s. And so we have recordings of people like Lee Irwin and Gaylord Carter and Bob Vaughan and John Murray and Rosa Rio, but also with an eye or a sensibility of what we expect today from a film score. And that's something that Max Steiner pioneered. Musical underscore pretty much drops out of film around 1929, 1930 when sound comes in and doesn't really take hold again until the mid 30s, with the exception of RKO and Max Steiner, because David O. Selznick at a certain point uh, becomes the person who runs that studio and decides, no, actually, music should be there.
Right.
And so he really developed, but it's much more related to opera with leitmotifs and underscore than punctuating and playing what I call song title puns, where the name of the song has something to do with the on-screen action, where you're enhancing the emotion of what's happening on screen to support it without getting in the way of it. The audience can see everything, and they're getting a lot of visual cues anyway. So you're just helping people stay, in that trance that is what viewing a silent film is like.
Man, just really cool. I get really excited hearing about all of that. I myself am not very musically talented, but my mom is, and growing up, she plays on the organ and whatnot for our church. So I've
Uh,
always just been around music, and it's really cool hearing how all that comes together.
yeah, yeah, and it's definitely part of the experience. So if you haven't ever seen a silent film with live music, even if you've seen it at your house or whatever with a recorded track, if you ever have an opportunity to see a silent film with live accompaniment, go. It's a different
Yeah,
experience. I
definitely.
find that I make a point of with some universities where there's a film course that teaches silent film. If I can, I'll go in and I'll play for one of the classes during the semester. I do this every year at NYU and Columbia and at Wesleyan as well, and just so that the students get a sense of what silent film really feels like.
Right. No, I think that's really cool keeping that alive because, I mean, so many of the people from the era they're gone. You know, we don't really have that experience anymore. So it's really cool that you're keeping that tradition alive.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, it's again in the interest of what I call audience preservation. You know, feeding the fans and then doing shows with things like Nosferatu and Safety Last and Steamboat Bill Jr. to get people in that first time.
Right.
Because with silent film, you can't explain it to somebody. Because it sounds like you're going to have it doesn't sound like it's going to be fun. It's
Right.
like having a rave in a library,
Right.
So, but you just go in the first time, which is one of the things about Halloween time that, yeah, Nosferatu, it brings people in, and then you go, oh, this is fun. So I'm happy to participate in that and help help the medium of silent film that way.
All right. All right. So with that, that's kind of the end of the show for today. But before we go, why don't you kind of tell people where they can follow you and any upcoming events you've got going on? And
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, my website is silentfilmmusic.com. It's all one word, no hyphens or anything. Silentfilmmusic.com. You can get on my email list, which is the best way to keep posted on where I'm playing and what I'm up to, because you don't have to count on an algorithm to think this is important to you, or you'll miss it because if there was an ad for something. So my emails are there, and there are links to everything else that I do, my podcast, my YouTube channel, my blog. The YouTube channel is youtube.com/silentfilmmusic. I will be playing in Brookings, South Dakota at the end of the month for Steamboat Bill Jr. at South Dakota State University. 2 shows of that. I am playing at the Cinema Arts Center twice this month for Phantom of the Opera. And also, I'm doing a live underscore for the original 1931 Frankenstein. Because that film, like the 1931 Dracula, has no music. And maybe it's sacrilege, but at the same time, as a contemporary audience, there are these long stretches of silence where you just ache for a little music. I don't play wall-to-wall, full-on music, but little moments like the moment when the creature, yeah, I knew not to call him Frankenstein. The creature, at first he stands up and they open the skylight and he's like this, and then without music, he's just sort of standing there. So just a little hint of something. So I'm doing that as well. We're showing a film called The Gorilla, which was recently found and restored by an archive in Italy, the Cineteca di Milano. We're showing that at the Silent Clowns film series, etc. I have anywhere from 8 to 12 to 15 shows a month. So go to silentfilmmusic.com. I am on Instagram. It's at Silent Film Music, and the same thing on TikTok. I'm actually trying TikTok.
Oh, awesome!
I'll do a little 1 minute or 90-second video standing in front of a theater that I play at. I talk a little about the theater and about the film, and I show people. So I'm on TikTok as well, and all the usual stuff. I'm eminently findable online, and I am happy to travel to wherever you are. So if you are a programmer or a public programs person at a theater or a library or at a university, anywhere anybody wants to turn off the lights and show Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd or whatever it is, I'm up for it. So find me, and I'm happy to come to wherever you are. And the hope for home video, undercrankproductions.com. We've got so many things that you never heard of, but you should.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have links to all of those things down below, guys. Make sure to follow him. And he's got great stuff going on and keeping the music of silent film alive. It's really cool.
Thanks so much, Harrison. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And with that, this has been Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin. This is my guest for today, Ben Modell. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Harrison.